I think the notion of an AGI is kind of nonsense because it's a sort of misunderstanding of the nature of intelligence. So when you look at people's definitions, and they rarely define it, but they're very simplistic.
What makes humans unique in the age of artificial intelligence? Hello and welcome to TechFirst. My name is John Koetsier. I'm super excited about today's guest. We've had some great ones on TechFirst. We've had billionaire technologists like Nathan Myhrvold. We've had the engineer who makes the first commercial cell phone call happen ever. We've had robot company CEOs building humanoid bots and inventors building drone delivery companies, and just had the chief scientist of Roblox. Today, we have an OG in AI, or machine intelligence. He's the DeepMind professor of machine learning at the University of Cambridge. He's a senior AI fellow at the Alan Turing Institute. Heard of Alan Turing? Anybody? He's a visiting professor of machine learning at the University of Sheffield. He's Amazon's former director of machine learning. Has a list of published articles and books that is extremely long. I scrolled it for a couple minutes. And he's a new author of a book called The Atomic Human: What Makes Us Unique in the Age of AI. His name is Neil Lawrence. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you so much, Sean, for having me on.
Looking forward to this. Thank you for taking the time. Let's start here with your book. If you had to summarize it, what's the key idea behind The Atomic Human?
So the notion within the title of The Atomic Human is taken from the Greek philosophical notion of the atom. So Democritus 300 BC says, if I took something in the physical world and cut it in half, and I take one half and I cut it again, and I take one half and cut it again, is there a point where I can't cut? Or does this process ad infinitum? Now, they were philosophers, so they didn't actually cut anything, but you can still ask this question. And they came up with the answer is, oh no, there should be a point that you can stop. So with the age of machine intelligence, you can ask the same question. If every time the machine's doing something, and going right back to the steam age, like movement that we considered something that humans have, and then every time it plays chess or can translate languages or hold a conversation, it's like cutting into us. Is there a point at which it can no longer cut? Because that would tell us something about the essence of what we are.
Wow. I had to think of Theseus' ship when you were talking about that.
It's not in the book, but yeah. I mean, in fact, going through the book made me think very differently about Theseus's ship. Because if people know Theseus's ship is this sort of ship that I guess every party is replaced. I don't actually know what Theseus did, but it presumably was a significant ship.
Nobody did anything back then. They just thought. I mean, nobody actually did stuff. It's just a thought experiment.
So, yeah. But let's presume that they were replacing the parts on this ship because it was a significant ship. And then the question is, well, is it the same ship? And like at the end of writing the book, when this question came up in my launch thing, I was able to give my immediate answer, which would have been very different from the answer I gave at the beginning. Yes, it's the same ship if people believe it's the same ship.
Oh, wow.
Because Theseus's ship is not just a physical construct, it's a mental construct. And if that ship is still at the head of the fleet, and Theseus is a great admiral, like Nelson or whatever else, even if he's dead, people will be inspired by that ship being Theseus's ship, by the idea of it. And that to me is like, I mean, I'm not religious, but you go, oh, that's like kind of a spiritual nature. But it's a spiritual nature that's coming about from other human beings' belief and a shared belief in something. So my answer to that is it remains the same ship, even if, so you can do this with your golf club. If you've replaced the handle of the golf club, if you've replaced the head of the golf club, is it the same club? Well, if you still believe it brings you luck, it's the same club.
Exactly. Okay, let's go back in time. You've had a long career already in AI, machine learning. How did you start? Why did you start?
Well, ironically, I started as a mechanical engineer. So I had a father who was an engineer. I loved playing with Lego. I wanted to build and fix things. And when I graduated, this is back in 1994 in the UK, and I looked around at all the jobs I'd want to do, I saw that no value was being given at all to the things I was passionate about, like how do you design cars or building plants or whatever else. The salaries for engineers in the UK in particular were very low. So I ended up sort of saying, well, I'm going to go do a different job. So I ended up working on oil rigs doing oil exploration, what's called wireline logging for a company called Schlumberger, because it was exciting. It was an intense job, but I knew I didn't want to do it forever. So while I was on these oil rigs, you get a lot of downtime. I read about these things called neural networks. This is about 1994, 95. And so, it came to a point where I realized I wanted to go and work on these things because it looked like they could solve problems that as a trained engineer, I knew I didn't have access to solutions for these problems. So I left the oil rigs, went to do a PhD in machine learning in these sort of very early days when no one else was interested.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And it's all history since then. Let's go forward to the present time. AI's had a massive resurgence, especially that term artificial intelligence. I know sometimes you prefer machine learning. Over the past, what shall we say, 5 years, 7 years, maybe more, maybe 4. Everybody's been investing like crazy. We've had the emergence of LLMs. How do you characterize our present state in the world of AI and progress to AGI, artificial general intelligence?
Well, first I should say, I think the notion of an AGI is kind of nonsense because it's a sort of misunderstanding of the nature of intelligence. So when you look at people's definitions, and they rarely define it, but they're very simplistic. Things like, oh, it's an economically rational thing. And in some sense, the point of my book is to highlight that, if so, I've got to say, take a step back. So think of Henry Ford. Apocryphally, he's supposed to have said, if he'd asked people what they wanted out of a car, they would have said a faster horse. And we're at this sort of Henry Ford of what do you want out of this AI? And what we're hearing is a more intelligent human. Well, that's kind of an interesting thing because, if we just say, what does an artificial general horse look like? I mean, horses aren't just used for transport. They're used for, young kids to get out of themselves. If, kids with things like autism or disabilities as a way of building their confidence. They're used as a way of people forgetting about their daily lives. Horses provide all sorts of things beyond transport. They're much more complex. But even if we ask the question, what does an artificial general vehicle look like? Well, is it a bicycle? Is it a Ford F-150 truck? Is it a Blackbird SR-71? It's an absurd question. And it's an absurd question because you have to know, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to spy on the Soviet Union in a plane that is faster than any missile they have? Well, it's not a bicycle. And, are you trying to get to work in a way that improves your health, in a way that allows you to relax? Then maybe it is a bicycle. And this challenge we have of very, very, very intelligent people who think in quite an unsophisticated way. So ironically, we see it right there. These are in some ways, the most intelligent people on the planet. And in other ways, they're some of the stupidest. But when everyone's hearing them say things around this notion of AGI or singularity, all these sort of things, because humans have respect for other humans with apparent expertise, they're falling into this trap, the sort of Henry Ford, they'd have asked for a faster horse track. And the idea of the book is to sort of explain why that's not the case, why our intelligence cannot ever be fully replaced by the machine. It can be augmented. We can work with machine intelligence. We can build a better society. Or machine intelligence, if used incorrectly, can undermine our society, can damage the things that we hold most dear to us. But which of those paths we're taking is a complex thing. And what we're likely to see is in some domains, it's helping us. In other domains, it's undermining us. That's what technology's done in the past. And that's what this technology is likely to do in the future.
It's pretty interesting to hear you say that. Makes perfect sense. I was just, I think 3-4 months ago at an artificial general intelligence conference in Panama City, and should have had you along. Would have made for a great keynote. Hey, everybody, this thing that you're here for, it doesn't, what you're saying
doesn't actually exist. One of the things about it is, even if so let's back away from that a little bit and talk about, there are some really interesting general principles behind intelligence. And now I think that's why very intelligent people get hooked into this stuff. So just like if we talk about vehicles, we can talk about some theory or even some practical implementations of vehicles that are common to most vehicles, like the wheel or aerodynamics, and for aircraft, the wing, or engines. But even then we start seeing, well, in different applications, we get different, forms of motive power. On a bicycle, it's my legs, or an electric motor. In a, Blackbird, I don't even know how they built that engine. But in a regular jet, it's a turbo. In a car, it's an internal combustion engine, and even it could be diesel or petrol, or increasingly electric. So even when you look at those general principles, there's variations in them, and then you start to combine them together to give you something that does the job you need. And intelligence is the same. So it's there wouldn't be a field of machine learning research looking at these things if it weren't the case that there aren't general things that you can pull out. I think the problem you find with a lot of AGI people is they're generally people that haven't done a lot of deployment in practice. They might have designed algorithms that are successful. Those are the most practical ones, but they're a little bit like those philosophers that don't like to cut anything. They're imagining what would happen if intelligence was unidimensional. But it's quite dangerous, because this notion of intelligence being unidimensional and us being able to sort of climb a ladder of intelligence, where does it come from? It comes from the eugenicists. General intelligence, the term, is from Spearman trying to support Galton in his theories that intelligence is like height. And that in Britain, paranoid about the rise of Germany, we need to breed more intelligent people to economically compete with Germany. United States proudly followed suit and big into eugenics, right? Now, you can see this is slightly different because we've got the same geopolitical considerations going on at the moment. Fear of China. We need a better AI than China. But instead of looking down and sort of saying, oh, population isn't intelligent enough, let's change the way they're breeding, people were looking up and saying, oh, the AI is more intelligent than me, and we need to think about building on that in order to compete with China. It's the same, goes with the same type of argument. Now, you might think, well, does it matter? Well, it kind of matters, because I think it's misleading people in the general population, and it even is misleading governments in terms of what sort of interventions we need to make the best use of this technology. And it's undermining many of the people in society who we're reliant on to deliver the future society we want, because instead of it being our teachers, medical professionals, even our lawyers, who are an intrinsic part of our modern democracy in delivering the society we want, instead of them being empowered, it's the people who think of intelligence in this very simplistic way who are being empowered.
Part of what I think you're saying there is that the term AGI doesn't make a ton of sense, because intelligence is not one thing. It's many different things. There's intelligence, numerical intelligence. There's logical intelligence, which is quite connected. There's physical intelligence. There's many, many different things. And we see areas where machine intelligence, machine learning does amazing, superhuman things, essentially. And that's really, really, really cool. The idea has kind of been that if we kind of combine enough of those sort of superhuman components, and then also put some, I don't know, sort of a super ego in place, so that there's some kind of general management of all this stuff, that data from Star Trek will pop out.
Yeah, it's like the chitty chitty bang bang of artificial intelligence. The flying car does all the things that you want. And, you just have to imagine, we just need to put wings on that sucker, and that's going to fly as well. Yeah. And, this is a sort of thought experiment you can have if you don't do stuff. Now, okay, why doesn't that come about? Well, in vehicles, it's because there's tensions between, things like carrying capacity, because that increases the mass of your vehicle, damages the aerodynamics and speed. And what you have at the moment is like Ferrari-like intelligence is looking around, sort of saying everything needs to be more like a Ferrari. But to be frank, we kind of need more sprinter vans. That type of intelligence, which isn't celebrated and glorified in society, is the backbone of everything we're doing. And unfortunately, the people who are often thinking about these things, don't really recognize the qualities of that intelligence. So it's sort of remarkable, isn't it, that when you look at what has AI delivered, it continues to deliver on things that highly intellectual people think are important, like playing chess or playing Go or translating things or being literate. And how much progress has it made on, I don't know, re-implementing a Patrick Holmes no-look pass? Well, no, because actually the people who design it are less interested in sport. They're less interested in soccer. They're less interested in American football. They don't even have a respect for that form of intelligence. These guys, although Mahomes always comes across quite bright, these guys may not always come across as bright when they're trying to articulate what's going on inside. But you put them on that pitch and they are doing things that are mind blowing if you understand what's going on in their bodies, right? So there's a genius to that we find incredibly difficult to reconstruct. And I think it's clear that there are some tensions between this. So some people are better improvisers, some people are better planners. Now, if you go into a task deciding to plan it or deciding to improvise it, which one works best depends on how that task pans out. It actually depends on how much uncertainty there is in that task, right? So sometimes the planner will win, sometimes the improviser will win. And this type of tension is sort of at the heart of intelligence, just like, the mass of a vehicle is at the heart of this tension. That means you don't get to have both, because the improviser's gone into the problem with a certain perspective and a certain set of ideas about how they're going to approach it. The planner's gone in with another, and they didn't know what the nature of the problem was going to be in its details when they were setting up to do this. So how do you react? Well, guess what? You look around humans, we have a spectrum of intelligence, a spectrum of capabilities. There is no one ring to rule them all. There's a diversity of intelligences.
It's fascinating to hear you say that, because I'm reflecting on, I've interviewed about 5, maybe 7 CEOs of robotics companies. Probably more than that, just general robotics, but I'm talking about humanoid robots, which is our current super sexy tech dream right now, to have a humanoid robot that walks, maybe talks, works in the warehouse, maybe comes into my house and vacuums and all this stuff. And of course, many people are very skeptical of that and saying, hey, you need to design for purpose. And actually, the humanoid form isn't really suited for that specific job. Sure, it's very general. Anyways, but it's very interesting to what you said, because some are approaching it from the planner perspective, and they're building all the pieces and they're trying to arrive at this great ultimate design. And some are saying, I don't know what's going to be. I'm building to do kind of one simple thing here, and we'll add a little thing and we'll add a little thing. Interestingly, the ones that actually have robots implemented in the workforce right now, not humanoid, are building that way.
Yeah.
I don't know what that says, but it says something about different ways to approach the same goal, I guess.
Typically, the improvisational approach works when the uncertainty is higher. And you can imagine in early product development, when we don't understand markets, that ability to improvise and pivot is more useful. Now, as the market matures, efficiency becomes key, because there's multiple market players and you're trying to compete on price or something like that. So at scale, you tend to see more planning coming in. And I think, it's interesting, so working at Amazon, corporate cultures have personalities. And it's interesting how, for example, the corporate culture of Amazon is constantly trying to keep that agility in place. But the truth is, just the heft of the company makes that harder. So they keep telling you things like, and it does, people do try and work like that. You're a company of a bunch of startups. But yeah, that might be. But, a startup doesn't have to worry about the corporate reputation of the company when going ahead and deploying some product that's going to look at personal data, right? A startup doesn't have to worry about, if you're breaking the sort of salary structure by employing some person in, right? Whereas in Amazon, you do. So you sort of found that there's things around human resources, things around legal, things around PR that you don't get to behave like a startup, no matter what anyone's saying. They don't tell you this. I just noticed. And it's because the company's too big for that, right? So the reason why these companies get disrupted is because there are small companies that aren't constrained by those things, who can reimagine ways of doing work, just as Amazon did that 25 years ago or more, and disrupted, companies like Sears and whatever else. And that cycle goes again and again, because, over time, the in some sense, in inverted commas, the intelligence of these companies, which is associated with their culture and their way of doing business, falls out of date as circumstances change
Mm-hmm.
around.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about LLMs a little bit, and how you view something like ChatGPT's latest version, and what it can do. It's interesting if I reflect on my use of it. I Google stuff way less. I call it a curiosity machine because I'll be walking around. I was walking around in Toronto a couple months ago, and I noticed all this spalling on the concrete on the overpasses and exposed rebar. And so I sent ChatGPT a question that a picture of that and said, "Why does this happen?" Gave me an answer. It was pretty cool, probably even correct.
Yeah.
And now it gives sources, so that's kind of nice as well. How do you view ChatGPT and LLMs in general? Super interesting. Next wave, dead end.
I think they're absolutely extraordinary, but not because of any of the things you're reading on Twitter at the moment. I almost think that, to a first order approximation, everything I'm reading, talking about them, I kind of don't agree with, because I see them in a very different way. This isn't some road to artificial general intelligence. This isn't, if we could just increase the planning, then we have an AGI. No,
More parameters.
more parameters, more data. This is something that is a totally new technology that is utterly transformational. It's something. So one of the key things that I highlight in the book is the difference between our intelligence and the machines is our limitations. So you get to the atomic human by sort of finding the thing the machine can't have is our limitations and our vulnerabilities. So meaning by that, one of our main limitations is around our ability to communicate, because we communicate with the speed of sound, which is 1,000,000 times slower than the speed of light. And yet we compute internally with things approximating the speed of light with this really odd intelligence architecture, because we're a distributed intelligence, but we've got extraordinarily high powered compute nodes and little straws of bandwidth between them. We've never built anything like that, because as soon as you come up with electricity, why wouldn't you use that for communication as well? Well, this is the beauty of evolution. There's no hidden hand behind that. It doesn't get to do that. It's just working with what it has in front of it, right? So this architecture means that there are particular things about our intelligence. It's not just this limitation. And actually, if you look at my estimate of the difference in communication bandwidth is not 1,000,000, it's 300 million. So to give a sense, that's the difference between walking speed and light speed, right?
Wow.
So it's like your intelligence is walking around. The computer is moving at the speed of light, and the factor of additional 300 is because of, clever coding things in how they're communicating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's an interesting follow-up question. Why don't we spend all our time telling each other stuff when we've got such a little bandwidth? And when I mean stuff, I mean like telling people about things that we need you to do. Some people do that. It's called micromanagement. But actually, what we do tend to do more of is we try and share with other people ideas about who we are and where we sit in a broader cultural landscape of human beings. Because what does this do? If I know you, John, as a sort of person who I'm very familiar with, I don't have to ask you stuff. I can do it before you ask.
You have an internal model of me.
Yeah, I know. He likes sort of Starbucks cold brew latte with 1,000 different syrups to destroy the
Nope. But I get your point.
Okay. See, I don't know you. So this is the problem, right? But, whatever the thing you like, I can get it to you without you asking, right? Without asking. So we don't need to use the communication bandwidth. What we have is this extraordinary intelligence that is capable of second guessing each other and collaborating without communicating to a large extent. Now, of course, we do communicate, but when we communicate, we use a landscape of ideas that are shared, what we might refer to as our culture. So, the book tries to communicate an enormous amount using analogies to get these ideas across. You might not, let's be clear, no one understands all the technical details of how an AI algorithm is working, but no one understands all the technical details of how a car's work. But they have a sense of what it does. And, you can use the car as an analogy. I can say artificial general intelligence, like an artificial general vehicle. What a silly idea. Whether you like the analogy or not, I'm communicating quite complex ideas around thinking by
Mm-hmm.
relating an unfamiliar concept to a familiar one. So large amounts of our intelligence are based on that shared sense of familiarization, ship of Theseus, the notion of Democritus's atom. And when we mention them, we're able to communicate very sophisticated ideas that we each think independently about. Now, when we're discussing or thinking or whatever we're doing, reasoning, that cultural cognitive landscape sort of defines, the spectrum of our ideas and how we communicate. And one of the sort of challenges up until very recently with artificial intelligence, she just didn't have access to. And the constant failed project was, but we can reconstruct these ideas from first principles. So we can sort of have a first principle definition of beauty or obscenity or intelligence, and just build that from logic, like Russell tried to recreate the whole of maths from logic, and then have a machine that's always right. It doesn't work because these ideas are not true in the way that mathematics are true. They're true in terms of that they're shared cultural artifacts that by believing in, we get to collaborate together. So they feel just as true to us as individuals. But in some cases, they're provably not true, but it doesn't mean they're not useful. It's a bit like books, some models are wrong, but some are useful. Well, all cultures are wrong, but all are useful. So what's the LLM given us? Well, by forcing that machine to try and reconstruct the next word across such vast quantities of text, in order to do that, it's had to develop, and I use the word loosely, some sense of our culture. Now, in the book, I refer to it as a human analog machine, because I sort of build on the way an analog computer, these machines from like the 1950s, used to work, to sort of say, well, what it has inside the digital machine is a set of analogous states that are analogous to this cognitive landscape. And they unleash the most extraordinary possibilities. Forget this thing, it can't plan, or look, it did the maths wrong, or all of this sort of crap we keep seeing, or even with the latest GPT. Just that ability to have a communication channel going from my little walking pace to be able to scale up to the machine's light speed, but communicating through our cognitive landscape, that's transformational. Forget everything else. I mean, we could stop now.
We'll take everything else,
and
yeah.
the society in the future would just look unimaginable. I mean, we could just say, no more, you just have to use the existing large language models. No one's going to do that. But you could say that, and that's already transformational. But it just takes time for humans to assimilate this technology, to change, with that tool. My best thing is not just the printing press. It's like the simultaneous invention of writing and the printing press, because what you're doing is giving access potentially to ordinary people to access the digital computer in a way that isn't mediated by a big tech company that has someone program how you're going to use it, gives you an Excel spreadsheet, that is mediated by your imagination. Now, that's mind blowing. And it has extremely large potential and extremely large problems associated with it. So most of my work is sort of like, if you extend that idea and you see, sure, people might put reasoning capabilities inside ChatGPT or inside Claude or whatever, and might improve its ability to do certain things. Actually, I'm kind of more interested in this entity as an interface. Like instead of using a GUI and clicking on stuff, you have an interface where the machine is giving you an analogy of a human as a way of communicating with it. That's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And the speed up is extraordinary because if you remember the old fashioned way, you needed to answer something, you Googled it and you looked and you maybe found 5 different web pages or sites and you had to look and maybe construct it. Maybe there's a Wikipedia article and you had to like bring these things together to get a full, complete answer picture that you thought was.
Well, and nowadays, Google seems to struggle to give anything of any depth. All it gives you is like 5 clickbait medium articles on the topic written by grad students trying to earn $1 on the side. That's my impression of Google. Maybe others, user experience may vary.
Exactly.
But it feels to me like we're back in like 1995 or 6 with Alta Vista, where you can never, the thing that should be on the internet, you can't find because it's just been overwhelmed with dross.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
so I sort of feel in some sense, the internet we knew in 2006 has already disappeared.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No question about it. You've said in the book, and you just said as well in this conversation, that in some ways human flaws are our biggest strengths. Why is that?
Well, because I think, if you look at, if you start to strip down what people are talking about as intelligence to terms that we can refer to as general, when it's decision making on the back of information, right? And then, you see that everywhere, whether that's groups of social insects or whatever. And that's marvelous in itself. So, you watch ants. I was, on vacation in southern Italy, and, our house was constantly overwhelmed with ants. And however I dealt with them, they just sort of reappeared. And then I sort of realized at some point that this type of ants seem to have multiple nests. So it's different than regular ants that bite across nests.
Huh.
My mother-in-law was looking at them, and she's Italian. So she's like, "Come on, intelligent." Some immediate reaction. Aren't they intelligent? Like, well, individually, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at how I can fool this ant. But as a collective intelligence, yes.
Yeah.
Now, the strength is because the key is about making decisions about ourselves. This comes back to that ship of Theseus point. Actually, what is important? What is our objective? What is whatever we decide as a group of humans it should be? Because there isn't a sort of ultimate answer. I have deep thought in there with the question of life, the universe, and everything. There isn't like a solution to life. All there is muddling forward in the best way we know how, with individuals making decisions, hopefully that improve society. Hopefully those individuals brought up in the right way to care about others, to care about our futures, to bring about a slightly better world. But the hardest problems in the world, things around like our health, our education, our social security, the way we do civil administration, the way we govern ourselves, they don't have solutions. And the notion that they have solutions is deeply problematic. So in this muddling along, it's super important that humans can empathize with other humans, that they don't lose touch with, the struggles of a single mother, or what it means to lose a loved one, what it would mean to lose a child. And these are, every time I say that, the hairs on the back of my neck go up. It's unimaginable. I haven't had it happen to me. It's just a sort of shocking thing. But you want the people, or you want the entities that are making those decisions to have their hairs go up on the back of the neck. And you want them to be subject to those same limitations themselves. So that's kind of how society works, that we hold people to account. You might be a judge, you might make a decision. Well, you're going to be held to account by the judiciary, by the system of judiciary in your country around that decision. And you've got a risk of loss of professional reputation. You're corrupting around that decision, we hope, in the best operating societies.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, you kind of need the weakness and limitation to be at the heart of the decision. It doesn't mean it can't be improved with the machine or it can't work with the machine, but it needs to be coming from the human in a meaningful way. What we can't afford to have is, and the example I use in the book is going back to 1200 BC when they're using the code of Hammurabi. Point 2 in the code is, well, if the legal case is a little bit difficult, throw them in the river and we'll see what the river gods say about it. It's an interesting principle. You can see how the judge might like it because they say, well, this way I avoid making an error myself. I'm handing it off to the river gods, and there everything. So we're fine. And you can see that tendency
AI is
in
like
AI
river
now.
gods.
AI as the river god. Trial by ordeal is trial by AI. I'm glad, why did they have to introduce the code of Hammurabi? Cities got large enough that we could no longer work under the sort of moral obligations to each other within small groups to handle individuals' behavior. We had to have a process behind their behavior. You can see them instinctively go, when the process gets difficult, let's hand it off. Now, one of the things we understood with jury trials, with judiciaries and everything else is that you want people who understand the circumstances of that individual on trial to have a sense of responsibility for that. And we have mechanisms in society for how we do that. The danger with AI is these highly sophisticated mechanisms, which of course they don't work well all the time, but most of the time you don't notice that they're working beautifully. And then some idiot comes along with some machine learning algorithm and kind of in one swoop takes us back to 1200 BC.
It's funny how history rhymes. It's really funny how history rhymes and how we can just, we have that today where we see that in multiple places in society. If we only get a smart system there, if we only, we can, we get an AI president. I'm Canadian, but a lot of AI researchers are in the States and want an AI president or an AI CEO or something like that, right? And basically throwing into the river gods and taking, reducing our responsibility. I also love, I have to mention, you brought up ants because I was recently in Honduras and I saw leafcutter ants and it was so cool. And I just stayed there for like 15 minutes and watched them. And they're going around with their little leaves and they're taking them down to their nests and they're going to let them rot there and they're going to eat the fungus that comes from them. And it's just a sophisticated, amazing process that, just none of those individually knows how it works or why it works or what to do. But somehow we are the ants and somehow we create these cultures and countries that sort of work.
And they come down to us, they bequeath to us over whatever it is, between 100 and 300,000 years as Homo sapiens, 2 million years before that as Homo erectus, whatever it is, like 9 million years as primates, 350 million years as animals that emerged from the ocean and started plodding about on the land. All of those things are within us. So I don't have to be religious to marvel at the computation that took place and the information that passed slowly down the generations. If we're going at walking speed, compared to evolution, we go at faster than light speed as we converse. But the complexity of that ecology around us that created all those things is well ahead of our culture. And us looking at those things, trying to watch that generation of ants evolve into a generation that doesn't fight across nests or whatever they're going to do next, equivalent to the machine watching us talk to each other. And when we destroy our ecology, we destroy it because of our ignorance of the scale and complexity of those processes that are operating on timeframes that are unimaginably slow. And when the machine undermines our culture by handing off too much decision-making to it, it undermines us because it has no understanding of the complexity of our culture. So you get this situation where the speed is on the machine side, but the complexity is on our side. The speed is on our side, but the complexity is on our ecology side. So when we think about threats from these technologies, the right way to think about them is not some sort of super intelligence existential technologies. It's to think about them in the same way that we undermine our climate, our ecology around us by making decisions that span across 200 years, right? Digging out the coal, starting to burn it up. It goes all the way back to when those first animals came out of the oceans and, reintroducing carbon that was buried so long ago into the atmosphere. Watt wasn't worried about that when he built the steam engine. He was worried about the pressure of the steam and where the boiler would blow up and kill people. He had a sense of safety, but he could have no conception of what it might mean to be introducing that carbon. Carbon dioxide was only just recently discovered by his friend Joseph Priestley. So he couldn't have any sense of the processes he was interacting with. So, it's not to blame him, not to blame any of us individually, but of course, it's the cultural practices that come down to us over time that operate across those slower times, that have these learnings in them that we don't understand the origin of. We understand the origin of these behaviors, but that they somehow are embedded with learnings across time. And I think, that's why one of the principal challenges we face when we think about our political systems is this tension between, and it's always complex because the United States uses these terms in slightly different ways, traditional small c conservatism and traditional small c liberalism. Because those traditions are, not that we've got now, but those traditions are small c conservatism is no, let's keep doing it the way that we've been doing it in the past. There's all sorts of good reasons we don't understand why having a king ruling the United States is a good idea, and small L liberalism is, but we know a new start. Let's change it up. Let's get a president in, and which is the right answer? Well, it depends. It depends on the circumstances. And you don't know for a few hundred years. We're only a few hundred years into these experiments. Not that I'm advocating to But fundamentally, we don't know. On ecological timescales, we don't know how
No,
this is going to pan
no.
out.
Which is a good segue, I think, to talk a little bit about safety and AI, and how humans can control what, in some vectors at least, will be either smarter than us or superhuman in capability, because we've already seen much dumber systems, not even remotely intelligent systems, have already wreaked havoc on us. There's been systems for buying stocks that have caused stock markets crashes, right?
Yeah,
There's been
flash
systems
crashes.
for
Yeah,
national defense.
excellent example. Yeah,
Yeah.
flash
There's been
crashes.
systems for national defense that have just, made the USSR think that they were seconds away from being obliterated by nuclear missiles from the United States, right?
Yeah.
Um, how I, I think the answer is we can't, but I'm gonna throw it to you. How can we help try and protect ourselves from these things?
Yeah, it's difficult, but I kind of think the current conversation is going in utterly the wrong direction, because the sort of idea of, oh, we need to have a group of thinkers who think about this centrally and worry about what might go wrong and intervene. That never works. You need people. What you actually need to do to solve these, you might need some central stuff going on, but it can't be inward looking and thinking we're the people that are going to control the future of the safety. No, you need to look outwards to the people who are going to be needing to use these systems in sensitive roles, where, that's medical staff, teachers, security, defense experts. And you need to be sort of working closely with them to understand what their role is at the moment, what the nuances of this role is. Which is, this takes time, and it takes understanding and listening. It doesn't involve you sitting centrally in an office thinking, I just need a neural network to detect criminals, and then we'll be fine, and then we'll deploy. Because what then happens is you go to the police stations around the country and you say you've got this. They have no idea about what AI is, what its limitations are, and they'll deploy it and naively follow what it says. No, you kind of need to get a deep understanding of what the roles of those key people in society is, and understand how this technology can best support those roles. And unfortunately, that's sort of the opposite of what we have with digital technologies, because the economies of scale mean that it's better to try and build a one-size-fits-all solution that you can distribute uniformly across the world, and then wait for CloudStrike to do a sort of quick update on their software and watch the world. Oops. Yeah. Oops. Yeah. This is clearly, you do not see this in evolution. You do not see well, you do actually. I'm telling a lie. The elms in Britain, for example, spread by rhizomes. So they duplicate themselves almost identically genetically. And they go through these sort of 250 year cycles of growing rapidly and spreading to create lots of elms, and then all being killed by a variant of Dutch elm disease.
Almost all being killed.
Almost all being killed. That's the trick. You need a couple to survive. Yeah, almost all being killed. A cycle that was just occurring, I think in the last 50 years in the UK in terms of the degrading side. Mm-hmm. So you want to go for the shared genetics approach. You're also going for the shared vulnerabilities. It allows you to scale and build quickly, but it also leaves you vulnerable to unforeseen intervention, whatever that is, that brings things down. We also saw the same, with our supply chain. We talk about flash crashes in finances. Well, supply chains, I used to work in supply chain with Amazon. They're becoming heavily automated, and you got the situation with whatever it was, the Evergrande, being stuck across the Suez Canal, bringing mass disruption. Well, it's because the efficiency of supply chains is so great. They don't leave much room for robustness. And there's this tension between efficiency and robustness. Is another one of these sort of fundamental things, like between mass and acceleration, that you can't get away from. So these things are sort of disturbing because, we actually try and regulate against them. We have antitrust legislation or whatever else to try and prevent companies exploiting economies of scale and actually adding great fragility to our society. But what we see in the case of digital technologies is that's not really been working. But we do see regulatory interventions, which aren't the exciting ones people are talking about. Everyone's going on about AI bills. No, the most important bill that recently was passed, certainly in the UK, was the Digital Markets, Consumers and Competition Act. which was actually all about what it looked like to dominate a digital market and how you regulate, because there's sort of economies of scale that are unfamiliar from the past, that are allowing companies to grow and dominate across market sectors in ways that aren't really healthy for our economy or our robustness in the future. So a lot of the interventions, the serious interventions, are sort of this form. Because, even if you look at the existential risk idea conflates two things: power asymmetries and automated decision making. So it's like, well, what if you have a really powerful entity that dominates society? And what if it's making decisions automatically without human intervention? Well, yeah, that's pretty bad. But already it's bad to have massive power asymmetries in society. I mean, I don't think you even get to that technical existential risk, because the fragilities you're introducing with these enormous power asymmetries, like with CloudStrike, at some point they start to overwhelm you. So the interventions are there, but oddly, the most interesting interventions are not the ones that sort of are most vivid and easy to write headlines about, because they're more along the lines of, okay, we need markets where there are more players who are, we want a situation, would be my example, where a teacher who is passionate about teaching, passionate about his or her students, passionate about building the next generation that are going to lead us forward, but also is interested in AI and has a really cool idea about how they can make their students' lives better and their lives a little better. And they want to take that idea. And you know what? Maybe that idea only applies in the province of Quebec because it's about French Canadian kids or something like that. Who knows? We want that to be deployable. We want that teacher to be able to succeed with that. We don't want to wait until Google suddenly decides that the province of Quebec is an interesting place to do business, because they're never going to decide that. And that's in Quebec. You go into the Tigray area of Ethiopia, or you go into Uganda, or any of the countries we would love to see, join us with better futures for their kids. And these companies just can't service that. So we sort of need an ecosystem of entities working with these technologies that are much closer to these sensitive areas of deployment that we really want to see improved, like health and education, etc. We're getting there because the regulations are coming in, but I think that the broader awareness of these challenges and where they're coming from isn't really there. We of course need to carry people and citizens along this journey and their understanding of where things can help. And I think the question is really mainly about the speed at which we can start bringing about that different kind of society.
Super interesting stuff. I recently did a TechFirst on an entrepreneur who's bringing an AI innovation center into Bhutan, because nothing was being done there, period. And the royal family, there still is a royal family there that still is in charge, wanted their people to be able to have some of the benefits of advanced technology, AI technology, in their own language. Super interesting. It makes me think, in terms of the risk factors you're talking about, is that antitrust and breaking apart massive companies, which frankly control AI to a large extent right now. We're talking the Metas of the world, Googles of the world, Apple to some small extent, OpenAI, which is not some massive conglomerate, but has incredible technology, Amazon. Breaking those apart makes us safer, because we'll have more competing models, more competing varieties, and more diversity.
Well, we don't know whether it's breaking them up or regulating in a certain way. But it's about access to that capability in a fair way, I think, is the key. And I don't know if it's breaking them. I don't know. And it's hard to know what the right regulatory interventions are. And you also don't want to punish people for being innovative. But we know we don't want those single points of failure. It's not in those companies' interests either. And in some sense, it's not like, I don't think that they have to be scheming to be doing this. It's just like their incentive structures push them in this direction. But I think the seriously problematic position we're in at the moment is those companies. It's a bit like if you look at their share values, they're predicated on future earning, which kind of imply that they're going to own AI. They're telling you that there's going to be this world where all decisions are going to be made by AI, and they're going to be the ones that own that. That's what their share prices and investors are sort of saying. And inside those companies, and there's lots of great people in these companies, but the pressure then becomes, the incentive becomes, whether those individuals believe in AGI or not, that AGI has become a key part of the narrative of their company, the culture of their company. And their ambitions are to sort of capture that market. And some of their CEOs have even explicitly said that. It's horrific.
Mark Benioff,
and it's not that they're sitting there
literally
thinking,
said that last year at Dreamforce.
Yeah. I mean, it's utterly horrific. It really is. I don't mean that he's a horrific person for saying that. I'm not saying that, because I understand, each of us individually couldn't see the whole picture. I understand what his role is in his company and what he's trying to do, and he's got investors and so on. But that's the sort of point. There's a great book by Popper called The Open Society that highlights the Open Society and its enemies, highlights the way we bring about change, or the democracies assimilate change is through piecemeal social engineers, people who understand the complexity and difficulty of the systems in front of them, working, doing their best with good intent to bring about better systems. And the problem we have with AI is we're replacing an information, and it's not just AI, but with digital technologies in general. What we're doing is we're getting the previous information topography, which was the printing press, paper, books, filing systems. And the people who understood how to wield that technology, who were the scribes from ancient Mesopotamia initially, the people who could read and write, who gained alongside the power that gave them responsibilities because they became lawyers and accountants and civil administrators. They didn't just have power. They did have power, but society gave them responsibilities to, special institutions, ways of holding their power in check. Whether it's being done well or not, another question, but it's there. What you're seeing is a transition away from the written words into digital. And the modern scribes are the software engineers, and their guilds are the big tech companies. These guilds and engineers have not yet gained the social responsibilities that we associate with these other guilds and profession. So you're in a position where they're busily exploiting that power to make enormous quantities of money. And we're sort of having to sort of fast forward. How do we deal with that? But this is where LLMs potentially really help, because, and this is my provocation. I'll just upset all the software engineers listening, probably already have, but let's go a stage further, John. But my provocation would be, okay, you want this technology to replace people on their jobs. How about we start by replacing software engineers? How about we start by eliminating the software engineer? It isn't that close, because there's so much software engineer does that isn't just coding, and there's so much knowledge you need. But it's clear that in some sense, and all software engineers want me to think, well, it's not just about coding. I do this. They'll come back with all these things. So, isn't that true for accountants, for doctors, for lawyers, for teachers? I had someone in a talk the other day say, well, surely we can do all the early teaching with LLMs. And I came back with this story of Ian Wright, the former Arsenal footballer, who, when he was a young kid, from a single parent family, didn't really have a father figure, all living in the same room with his family, bit of a tearaway, wasn't very academically gifted. As he says, potentially on the wrong path. There was one physical education teacher who believed in him as a person. And you can see Ian Wright talking about this on a YouTube video. And he's saying, and he was a Spitfire pilot. He'd fought in the Second World War. And you can see what it meant to this little boy. You can see the little boy talking as Ian says that, and how that turned his life around. And it's the most emotional video ever, because then the teacher appears behind him and he hasn't seen the teacher in years, right?
I've seen that video.
That's the role of a teacher. Sure, they understand arithmetic. Well, maybe this teacher didn't, but that's the role of a teacher, not this other stuff.
Yeah.
Believing in a little boy that they saw something in, and turning that little boy's life around, and having that little boy exist in society and inspire other little boys and girls. That's the role of a teacher. That's something that can't be replaced by the AI. And those are the people that we need to be supporting. But we're undermining them if we're centralizing the decision-making. once again, I don't want to say these people are evil or whatever else, but the systemics are wrong.
We're just doing what we're doing. We're in the box
Yeah.
we're in. We're optimizing
We're
our
in the
local
box.
conditions. And
A great box that's a key part of society as well. You know, it brings many, many good things to us. But it's
Yes.
just gone a bit rogue in this case. Needs to be pulled back into a place where it's doing its job better.
everything has rhythms and rhymes, and I have some faith that we will find that there as well. I have to call this to a close. I have to assume you've got things to do and got to run. This has gone longer than I intended. I thank you for taking this time. I really do.
And it was great. Yeah.
It was a lot
Really
of fun.
great to talk to you,
It was
John.
a lot
And
of
I am optimistic like you because I believe in humans. I believe in that teacher. And I believe that people like that can work together and we can deliver the future. And I'm looking forward to seeing it happen.
Wonderful. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
And you, John.